The moment our captain pressed a gun against a nurse's head, 30 armed soldiers unknowingly signed their own defeat, because that nurse wasn't just a healer. He was a retired Navy SEAL who had spent his entire life surviving places far deadlier than us. My name is Tovin. I was, until very recently, a junior medical officer of the Vorik Coalition, which is a long and important-sounding title that means I held bandages while braver people made terrible decisions. I am telling you this story because the Coalition has ordered me to tell it, over and over and over again, to every cadet, every captain, every recruit, and every loud, confident fool who still believes that softness is the same thing as weakness. So, settle in, get comfortable, pour yourself something warm, because every single thing that went wrong that day, every bruise, every broken bone, every shattered piece of our pride could have been avoided if one person had simply read past the first page of a file. But he didn't. Of course he didn't. Why would he? We were the predators. We were the conquerors. We had the ships, the guns, the armor, and the smug little smiles to match. We had numbers. We had a plan. And by the end of that day, 4 of us were sedated. 1 was restrained, 1 was hiding behind a cleaning cart and weeping, and I, the proud medical officer of the Vorik Coalition, was folded up inside a supply closet, wrapped in a borrowed blanket, sniffling into a stale ration bar that a human had personally, gently handed me. So yes, let us talk about exactly how that happened. Take your time with it. I certainly have. I think about it every single night. It started with a plan. And I want to be very precise about the kind of plan it was, because the kind of plan matters enormously here. It was the sort of plan that sounds flawless when the captain announces it in a bright, ringing voice and sounds completely insane the very moment someone repeats it back to him slowly. The target was a human medical station. Small, remote, civilian. It floated out near the far edge of their territory like a forgotten lunchbox someone had left on a windowsill. It had no warships, no defense grid, no fleet on standby, no turrets, no mines, no fighters. It had supplies, medicine, surgical equipment, and exactly 14 unarmed staff members. 14? We brought 30 soldiers. 30. Captain Garrick had actually wanted to bring 40, but he stopped himself, and I remember the moment he stopped himself because he turned to us, grinned with all of his teeth, and said, and I am quoting him exactly, "We do not need 40 soldiers to frighten a handful of nurses." He laughed when he said it, and we all laughed with him because that is what you do when the captain laughs. Oh, we were so very good at laughing that day. We laughed in the staging bay, we laughed in the shuttle, we laughed in the airlock. We were, as a unit, world-class at laughing right up until the precise second we very suddenly were not. Now, the file. There is always a file. The Coalition prepares a careful dossier on every target, and a good officer reads the whole thing, beginning to end, before he risks a single soldier. Garrick was not a good officer. Garrick was a loud officer, which he had spent his entire career confusing for the same thing. The file on the station was thin and dull. 14 names, 14 faces, 14 unremarkable little lives, a cook, a technician, 2 doctors, some nurses, a quartermaster. Nothing. Background noise. Except for one entry. One name had a strange marking beside it. A redaction. A small, neat black bar laid over the space where a person's previous occupation should have been printed. Just that one line, hidden, sealed, classified by a government that no longer even technically held authority over this individual. Everything else about him was visible. His blood type, his height, his shift schedule. But his past, the thing he used to be, was buried under a careful stripe of black. I pointed at it. I actually, physically pointed at it, which means that whatever happens to my reputation in the rest of this story, at least I have that. I lifted one finger, set it on the screen, and I said, "Captain, this one, his history is sealed." Why would a nurse have a sealed history? And Garrick, the brilliant tactician, the fearless leader, the man whose name was on the operation, looked at that little black bar for perhaps half of a second, snorted through his nose, and said, "Probably owed someone money." That was it. That was the entire risk assessment for the operation. A redacted military record, a deliberately erased former life, a sealed past hidden by an old government, and our commander glanced at it and decided it was about a debt. A debt? I have replayed that single moment more times than I can count, and I will go on replaying it for the rest of my career, because the thing hiding behind that small black bar turned out to be the worst, most catastrophic decision any of us would ever very nearly fail to survive. The boarding itself went beautifully, and that, I have come to understand, is the cruelest part of the whole affair, because the ease of it fed our confidence, and our confidence is what killed any chance we had of leaving with our dignity. We breached the outer airlock. We flooded the corridors in a fast, practiced wave. We shouted all of the correct and frightening things you are trained to shout. Down, hands where we can see them. Do not move, do not speak. And the humans, bless their soft little hearts, did precisely that. They went down. They raised their trembling hands. They looked up at us with exactly the kind of fear you want to see on the face of prey. A doctor began to weep openly. A young technician pleaded with us in a cracking voice. An older woman near the supply lockers actually fainted dead away, which Captain Garrick found enormously, visibly satisfying. He strutted through that medical bay like he had personally conquered 1,000 worlds, rather than 14 people whose single most dangerous tool was a thermometer. He walked tall. He puffed up. He let the soldiers see him be unafraid, because a captain must always be the least afraid creature in any room. And the operation at that exact moment was a complete and total success. And then there was the nurse. He did not go down, he did not raise his hands, he did not even look up, not at first. He was kneeling on the floor beside a wounded patient, a young woman named Lena Marsh, who had a badly torn leg and a pale, frightened face. And this nurse, this entirely ordinary-looking man in a plain blue medical uniform, simply kept working, steady hands, slow, even breathing. He pressed a fresh bandage into place. He checked a reading on a small monitor. He murmured something soft and low to her that I could not quite hear from where I stood. 30 armed soldiers had stormed his home, his workplace, his quiet little station at the edge of nowhere, and the only thing he appeared to be concerned about was a single leg wound on a single frightened girl. I want you to understand how genuinely strange this was for us. Truly strange. Unsettling in a way I did not have words for yet. Everyone else in that room behaved like proper prey. They cowered, they wept, they begged, they fainted. He behaved like furniture. Like we were weather. Like a storm had simply rolled in through the windows and he had calmly decided to finish his work while it passed. When a soldier finally crossed to him and screamed directly into his ear to get down on the ground, the nurse glanced up, unhurried, looked at the rifle, looked at the soldier holding it, and said, in the politest, most patient voice you have ever heard in your life, "Give me 1 moment, please. I am almost finished here. And do try not to bleed on the clean floor. It is very hard to mop, and I only just did it." We read that as stupidity. Obviously we did. What else could it possibly be? Only an idiot ignores 30 rifles. Only a fool stays calm with a soldier shrieking in his ear. We had it completely, perfectly backwards. It was not stupidity at all. It was patience. It was the specific bottomless patience of a man who had stood in rooms far worse than this one, across from men far more frightening than us, and had walked out of every last one of those rooms on his own 2 feet. We simply could not tell the difference. That right there was our entire problem, summarized in a single sentence. We could not tell the difference between a man who was harmless and a man who was choosing, for the moment out of mercy, to act like it. His name, we would soon learn, was Ray Calder. Captain Garrick naturally could not let it go. A predator must be obeyed. A captain must be feared. And here was this quiet little healer making the great Garrick feel small in front of his own soldiers, simply by refusing to be afraid of him. That was intolerable. That could not stand. So Garrick did the thing the entire Voric coalition now formally, urgently warns every officer against. The thing that is now, and I am not exaggerating even slightly, printed in red ink near the top of every single human file we possess. He walked across the room. He raised his sidearm, and he pressed the cold barrel of it directly against the side of Ray Calder's head. "Codes," Garrick said, low and pleased with himself. "Supply codes. Now. All of them. Or I am going to paint this clean floor of yours a brand new color." And the room went silent. But I need you to understand that it was not the frightened kind of silent we had been enjoying up to that point. It was a different kind entirely. It was the kind of silence that arrives right before something very large, and very patient, and very bad decides to shift its weight. Even I felt it crawl across my skin, and I am by trade and by temperament and by every fiber of my being, a complete and unapologetic coward. The hair on my arms stood up. Something old and animal in the back of my skull began, very quietly, to scream. Ray Calder did not flinch. He did not freeze. He finished tying off Lena's bandage with two neat, unhurried motions. He smoothed it flat with his thumb. He patted the back of the girl's hand once, gently, the exact way you reassure someone right before you have to step away from them for a little while, and then slowly, calmly, he turned his head just enough to press his own skull a little harder against the barrel of the gun, and he looked up at Captain Garrick with an expression I will carry with me until the day I die. It was not fear, it was not anger, it was something far, far more unsettling than either of those. It was disappointment. The pure, weary, bone-tired disappointment of a parent who has just watched a small child reach out for the one single thing in the entire room he was specifically, repeatedly told not to touch. And then he asked a question. One quiet question. He said, "Are you sure you want to do this?" That was all of it. 7 words, no threat behind them, no raised voice, no drama, no posturing, no bravado. Just a simple, almost kind, almost gentle invitation to stop and reconsider while there was still time. And Captain Garrick, the great and fearless Captain Garrick, threw back his head and laughed. I have spent a great deal of my life since then thinking about that laugh, about the particular sound of it, about how it was the very last truly confident sound my captain would ever make. Because in the time it takes a man to finish laughing, in that small, careless, fatal little gap of distraction, Ray Calder moved. I need to slow all the way down now. I need to stop and breathe and walk you through this carefully because what happened next happened faster than I am able to describe, and I want you to feel every single horrible, beautiful fraction of a second of it. The first thing that moved was his hand, not toward the gun, toward Garrick's wrist. He did not grab desperately for the weapon like a cornered, panicking animal. He took the wrist instead, the joint, the precise place where all of Garrick's strength was being aimed, and he turned it. He simply turned it. The way you turn a doorknob on a door you have opened 10,000 times. There was a sound, a wet, sharp, deeply personal sound, and all at once the sidearm was no longer pointed at a nurse's head. It was aimed at the ceiling, and then it was aimed at nothing at all, because it was falling, because Captain Garrick's fingers had abruptly and completely forgotten how to hold things. The second thing that moved was Ray's shoulder, rising up and driving into Garrick's chest with the slow, patient, almost boring violence of a man who has performed this exact motion 10,000 times and stopped finding it interesting somewhere around the second 1,000. And my proud captain folded. He folded like an empty chair. The air left his body in a single, undignified, whistling wheeze, and the great conqueror dropped to one knee on the very clean floor he had just threatened to ruin. And the third thing, and I swear to you on my own life that this is true, the third thing was that Ray Calder was already standing, already past Garrick, already turning calm and level toward the next soldier in the room. He had not rushed. That, more than anything, is the detail that undid us. There was no panic in him. None. No frantic energy, no wild flailing, none of the desperate scrambling motion we associate with a fight for one's life. He moved like a man walking through his own kitchen in the dark, in the middle of the night, on his way to get a glass of water. He knew exactly where every object was. He knew exactly where every one of us was standing. And he was, quite simply, turning the lights out, one soldier at a time, on his way through the room. 2 more soldiers raised their rifles. And 2 more soldiers very abruptly found those rifles pointing somewhere useless, found their own arms bending in directions that arms are simply not constructed to bend, found their bodies meeting the floor with the grim, repeating, rhythmic thud of wet laundry being thrown down a chute, one heavy piece at a time. He did not waste a single motion. He did not waste a single breath. He did not waste so much as a single glance. By the time a 4th soldier had finished having the complete thought, "I should shoot this man," Ray Calder was already standing in the exact spot where that soldier had been standing, and the soldier himself was already somewhere lower, and quieter, and considerably more unconscious than before. And the rest of us, the proud invaders, the 30 fearless conquerors, we finally, far too late, began to understand that we had made a mistake, not a small one, not a fixable one, not the kind you laugh off later in the staging bay, the kind of mistake that reaches into your chest and rewrites everything you ever believed about yourself in real time while you stand there and watch it happen. I lunged for the file. I genuinely do not know why I did it. Some small, frightened animal part of me decided that if I could only read the redacted line, if I could only understand what it was we were actually facing, then somehow it would help. It did not help. It was never ever going to help. But I read it anyway with my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the reader, while my crewmates were quietly, methodically disassembled all around me, and the words finally became visible as the station's own systems, sensing the assault, lifted the old classification and let the truth show through. It said, Naval Special Warfare. It said a designation I did not recognize, 3 short letters that the humans apparently spoke aloud with a strange, hushed, reverent fear of their own people. It listed years of service in a number that seemed too large. It listed deployments in a count that made no sense, places I had never heard of, operations described only by code names. And it said, in plain, flat, bureaucratic language that somehow made the whole thing infinitely worse, that this man, this gentle nurse who had asked us so politely not to bleed on his floor, had spent an entire former life walking, willingly, on purpose, into the very worst and most dangerous places his species was capable of producing, without backup, without rescue waiting, without the simple, ordinary comfort of numbers, and then walking back out of them again every single time. A Navy SEAL, that was the word hiding behind the small black bar. That was the debt our captain had so casually assumed the man owed. Not money, not a favor, not a gambling problem, a talent. A trained, tested, certified, hard-won talent for doing the exact thing that was, at that very moment, happening to my entire crew. I lowered the reader. I looked up. I looked at the man crossing the room toward another soldier, and the 2 images would not fit together inside my head no matter how I tried to force them. The gentle nurse who had knelt to soothe a frightened, wounded girl, and the unstoppable thing now moving through my soldiers like a rising tide. They were the same person. They had always been the same person, and that was the part that none of us could hold in our minds at once. We had built our entire idea of strength upon the comfortable belief that a healer and a killer were opposites, that a man who would kneel to mend a wound could not, in his very next breath, rise to make 10 of them. Humans, it turns out, did not agree with us. Humans had decided, somewhere far back in their strange and bloody history, that the single most dangerous thing in any given room should also be the thing most fiercely committed to keeping you alive. And then, having built such a creature, they dressed it in a soft blue uniform, handed it a clipboard, and sent it out to the quiet edge of nowhere to care for the sick and the hurt. We had not invaded a hospital. We had wandered, laughing, straight into the resting place of something that had chosen of its own free will to stop hunting, and then we had walked up to it, and put a gun against its head and laughed in its face. Command, what little of it remained, collapsed in under a minute. Garrick was on the floor, gasping, clutching his ruined wrist, trying desperately to bark orders that nobody could possibly follow, because every soldier he was attempting to command was no longer conscious enough to receive the words. He kept shouting anyway, "Form up, suppress him, flanking positions now." And there were simply no soldiers left standing to form up with, and no positions left to flank from. The corridor had become a quiet, orderly, groaning graveyard of fallen bodies and scattered, dropped weapons, and at the calm center of it all walked one single man who had not, as far as I could tell, even raised his heart rate to do it. Skell, a young trooper, the loudest of all of us during the boarding, the one who had shouted the most threats and laughed the hardest at the fainting woman, dropped his rifle entirely, turned and actually crawled on his hands, into a small storage alcove, dragging a wheeled equipment cart in front of his body like a frightened child hiding from thunder. I did not judge him for it, not even a little, because at that exact moment I myself was quietly, frantically calculating the precise location of the nearest place a coward might hide. And then there was Lena Marsh, the wounded patient, the young woman with the torn leg and the pale face, the one this entire catastrophe had been bandaged around from the very beginning. She propped herself up on her elbows, looked across the wreckage at the 3 of us who were still, somehow, upright and shaking, and she said, almost kindly, almost gently, "You should surrender now, truly, right now, while he is still in the mood to let you. As though our continued breathing were a generous kindness being actively, patiently extended to us, moment by moment, as though death were simply the default setting in that room, and mercy the rare exception that Ray Calder was personally choosing, breath by breath to keep granting. We did not listen to her, of course. We never listen. That is, in fact, the entire reason this story exists, and the entire reason I am required by my superiors to keep telling it. A soldier near me lifted his weapon one final time, some last flickering ember of pride or panic, and I watched Ray Calder cross the whole length of that room toward him without the slightest hurry, take the rifle out of his hands as easily as lifting a cup from a table, and lower the man to the floor with a patience that was, somehow, far more terrifying than any rage could ever have been. Because rage, at the very least, I could have understood. Rage is loud, rage is hot, rage makes mistakes. This was not rage, this was a calm professional quietly finishing the last item on a list. And here is where the story turns. Here is where it became something I never could have predicted, something that has stayed lodged in me far longer and far deeper than the fear ever did. When it was over, when every last soldier was down and disarmed and accounted for, Ray Calder did not stand over us in triumph. He did not gloat, he did not crow, or boast, or spit. He did not even look pleased with himself. He looked tired. He looked exactly the way you look after a long and unpleasant task that you genuinely wish had not been handed to you. And then he walked to where Captain Garrick lay curled and wheezing on the floor, the great conqueror, the fearless leader, now reduced to a trembling heap of bruised pride and broken bone. And Ray Calder knelt down beside him, not to finish him, to check on him. He pressed 2 fingers to the side of Garrick's throat, silently counting a pulse. He tilted the captain's head back, checking the airway, making sure he could breathe. He ran his careful hands along Garrick's ribs with the very same gentle, practiced competence he had shown the wounded girl not 10 minutes earlier, feeling for what was broken, deciding what would need care. The man my captain had threatened to execute on his own clean floor was now, calmly and without a single trace of irony, making absolutely certain that my captain would not die of his own monumental stupidity. I did not understand it then. I am not entirely certain I fully understand it even now. He had every reason in the universe to leave us broken on that floor. We had earned, fairly and completely, every single consequence the cosmos could possibly deliver to us, and instead, the very instant the threat ended, the killer stepped quietly aside, and the nurse came back, as easily as if the two of them had simply traded places, as though the violence had been nothing more than a uniform he could remove the instant it was no longer needed. He moved from fallen body to fallen body, checking pulses, setting bones, applying pressure to wounds, murmuring the same soft, low reassurances he had given to Lena, to the very men who had stormed his home to rob and frighten him. I have served alongside soldiers for my entire life. I have stood near hardened killers and proud warriors and decorated veterans, and I have never, not once, seen anything that frightened me as completely and as permanently as that simple, unbothered mercy. I, meanwhile, had finally found my supply closet. I am not proud of this part. I want you to know that. I had been backing slowly, quietly, one careful step at a time, into a small storage room off the main bay, and I pulled the door most of the way shut behind me, and I folded myself down into the smallest possible version of a Voric medical officer. I was shaking. Not from any injury, because no one had laid a single finger on me. I was shaking from the sheer, total, violent rearrangement of everything I had ever believed about strength and softness, and which of the two of us in that room had actually, all along, been the dangerous one. I sat there in the dark, on the cold floor, listening to the quiet, steady sounds of a man carefully putting my crew back together, and I waited to find out what was going to happen to me. The door opened. Ray Calder stood there in the light spilling in from the bay, looking down at me, this small, trembling alien folded up and hiding among the rolls of bandages and the bags of saline, and I braced. I truly, completely braced, for a blow, for a threat, with the same terrible, level patience I had just watched calmly dismantle 30 trained soldiers. And instead, this man, this Navy SEAL, this nurse, reached past my head, took a folded thermal blanket down off the shelf above me, and draped it across my shaking shoulders. Then he crouched down low, all the way to my level, looked me over carefully with the same professional, attentive eyes he had used on everyone else, and he asked me a single question. He asked, "Are you hurt?" That was all. Are you hurt? Not, who sent you? Not, where is your fleet? Not, give me one good reason I should not finish what your captain started. Just a healer, finding one more frightened, shaking creature in the wreckage of a bad day and stopping to check on it. I shook my head. I could not make my voice work. He nodded, reached into a pocket on his uniform, pulled out a ration bar, the dense, slightly stale human kind, and pressed it into my hands. And he said, "Eat something. Your blood sugar is probably a mess after all that. You will feel a little better, I promise." And then he stood, and he left me there, in the closet, with my blanket and my ration bar, and he went back out to finish caring for the 30 people who had come to kill him. Captain Garrick woke up restrained. "I will grant you that one small satisfaction, freely, because I will admit that I personally enjoyed it a great deal." By the time the captain's senses fully returned to him, he was secured, neatly and humanely, his broken wrist already cleanly splinted by the very man he had pressed a gun against. And Ray Calder sat across from him, not standing over him, not looming, not gloating, just sitting calmly on an overturned crate, the way you sit down with someone when you need to have a long and difficult conversation with them. And he spoke to my captain in a voice so quiet, so level, so utterly and completely without anger, that it was somehow worse, infinitely worse, than any scream could ever have been. He said, "You came to a place where people are sick, where people are hurt, where the only thing that anyone here knows how to do, the only thing any of us are even here for, is to help. And out of every single person on this station, you walked up and put a gun to the head of the one whose entire job, in two completely separate lives now, has been keeping people alive." He let that sit in the air for a long moment. He let it land and settle and sink in. "I stopped doing the other kind of work a long, long time ago. I chose this instead. I chose mending over breaking. I chose it on purpose every single day for years. So I need you to understand something. I need you to really understand how much you had to get wrong today, how many warnings you had to walk straight past, to make me pick the old work back up again even for one single minute." Garrick said nothing. For the very first time in all the years I had known him, there was, genuinely, truly, absolutely nothing for Captain Garrick to say. "Go home," Ray Calder told him quietly. "Tell them what a hospital is, tell them what a nurse is, and tell every last one of them that the next time, the very next time any of you decides to point a weapon at one of our healers, you will not be lucky enough to find one who still remembers how to be gentle with you afterward." That was the lesson. That was the whole of it, delivered without a single raised voice, without one blow that had not been strictly, absolutely necessary. A warning, wrapped in a thermal blanket, and handed over with a stale ration bar and 2 careful fingers pressed to a pulse. We were released. That is the part that outsiders never ever believe when I tell them. He let us go. He patched us, he restrained us, he kept us alive and stable until reinforcements could arrive to collect us, and then he let every single one of us live, including Captain Garrick, including Skell, who had cried behind the equipment cart, including me, the coward in the closet with the blanket. 30 invaders walked, armed and laughing, into that little station, and 30 invaders walked, or in most cases were carried, back out of it again. Not because we deserved a single shred of that mercy. We did not. We deserved none of it. But because mercy for these humans is not the absence of the ability to do harm, it is the constant daily presence of that ability, held carefully back on purpose, by people who have simply quietly decided not to use it. I have been reassigned since that day. The Coalition felt, quite correctly, that I was no longer well suited for boarding operations, on account of the closet, and the blanket, and the way I now flinch and go cold whenever I happen to see a blue medical uniform. So I file reports now. Quiet work. Safe work. Work with no rifles in it. And every single report I file regarding the human species carries the same note, underlined twice, written in red, placed near the very top of the page, where no captain could possibly miss it, no matter how loud, or how lazy, or how completely certain he is that softness must mean weakness. It reads, "Never put a weapon to one of their healers." That is the entire warning. That is everything we learned that day, distilled down into a single short line, paid for with 30 bruised soldiers, several broken bones, 1 shattered captain, and the complete dignity of an entire boarding party. Read the file. Read the whole file. Read past the first page. Read past the redactions, past the sealed records, past the small, neat black bars laid over the places where a person's old life is quietly hiding. Because the humans, in all of their strange and contradictory and impossible glory, took the single most dangerous thing they knew how to build, and they did not lock it inside a warship, or a weapon, or a cage. They dressed it in soft blue scrubs, they handed it a clipboard and a roll of bandages, they told it, very gently, to be kind, and then they sent it out to the quiet places, the forgotten places, the little lunchbox stations floating alone at the edge of nowhere, to wait, calmly, patiently, for fools exactly like us to come knocking. So no, we are not the apex predators of this galaxy. We never were. We were only ever the species loud enough and proud enough to believe that we must be, right up until the moment a gentle man knelt down to bandage a frightened, wounded girl, asked us one single quiet question, and then, when we laughed in his face, stood back up and showed us all, precisely, exactly, and unforgettably, why you never ever, under any circumstances, threaten the one person in the room who has spent his entire life learning how to keep the rest of us alive. My name is Tovan. I am alive today only because a human chose, freely, to let me be, and I will go on telling you this story, exactly as it happened, for the rest of my days.